Chapter 41 Absolute Monopoly, please add to the book list. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Brent immediately envisioned the scene, ladies buying cosmetics, then grabbing a hat or shoes. He was genuinely impressed by the Crown Prince's business sense. Nearby, the old man with glasses chimed in, "Your Highness, nearly half our customers yesterday were aristocratic women from Versailles. Should we open a branch there?" "Unnecessary," Joseph replied, smiling and shaking his head. Having them trek to Paris emphasizes the Parisian angel's exclusivity. Plus, Parisian aristocrats will follow suit, seeing them constantly coming and going. After discussing sales, Brent added, "Your Highness, in the past few days, 6 individuals, Count Alblas, the Duke of Lavalier, Marquis Montes, among others, have expressed interest in franchising Paris Angels. Take a look at this." From day one, Joseph planned to expand Paris Angels as a franchise. Opening stores one at a time was slow and tedious. Before you could open a handful of stores, capitalists with a keen eye would copy the idea and become competition. Even though Joseph held the core technology of salicylic acid and wasn't afraid of competition, he'd still lose customers, so he aimed to use the franchise model to dominate the cosmetics market in France and even Europe as quickly as possible, ensuring Paris Angel had no rivals in product effectiveness, marketing, or market reach. After all, antitrust laws didn't exist yet. It'd be a shame to miss out on the chance to monopolize the market. Moreover, his cosmetics profits were incredibly high, around 800% to 1,300%. Giving a fifth to franchisees was fine with him, and they'd be making a killing. Finally, Paris Angels franchisees would create a robust sales network. If he developed other products later, he could quickly distribute them and recoup costs fast. Joseph nodded to Brent. "I'm entrusting all franchise matters to you. The franchise terms and negotiation strategies are in the document. I trust you've memorized them. Bring it to me for my signature once you've finalized the deals." Joseph didn't underestimate the intelligence of people in this era. They simply lacked the vision and insights of future generations. Teach them, and they'd perform just as well as anyone later on, especially someone like Brent, who was a leader in his field. Joseph couldn't waste his time on Paris Angel's daily operations. He needed to train his subordinates and delegate power early. "Thank you for your trust," Brent said, bowing with a hand to his chest. "I won't let you down." Rue Serpentine, Paris. The Paris Angel headquarters welcomed several VIPs. These included Count Alblas, the Duke of Lavalier, and the Marquis of Montes, old nobles with deep pockets or new money millionaires. Either way, they were prominent figures in Parisian business. They were all there for the same reason, to franchise Paris Angels. Brent first showed everyone the production workshop, which wowed these business elites. Workshop. More like a mansion. The workers wore neat, clean uniforms, sitting on carved chairs while they worked. Both the raw material warehouse and the filling table were made of high-quality oak, exquisitely designed and spotless. After touring the production plant, Brent led them into the conference room, revealing a large painting of the company's store. "Franchising is simple. You can own a store just as impressive as this one." Then, he smiled. "I know you're worried about achieving such a high standard. But don't be. Paris Angel Company handles all the store's decoration, layout, and everything else. You get a store ready to go. You don't even have to worry about store management or employees. Paris Angel helps train and supervise, and even provides employee uniforms. In short, you sign the franchise contract, and you count the money." Count Alblas, Duke Lavalier, and the others smiled knowingly. Brent then dropped a bombshell. "I can reveal a secret. The Paris Angel store on the Champs-Élysées has achieved sales of 126,000 livres in a single day. Even these seasoned business veterans were stunned. This store's daily turnover exceeded the monthly revenue of their huge factories." Brent continued, "The company will only authorize 3 franchise stores in Paris, with at least half a league between each location. Half a league is more than 2 kilometers, ensuring no competition between franchisees. Oh, and for the first franchisee, we're offering a discount. The franchise fee is 150,000 livres. Subsequent fees rise to 180,000 livres. For locations outside Paris, it's 110,000 livres. The business elites began murmuring. The franchise policy and potential were tempting, especially after seeing the Champs-Élysées store's grand opening. But they were new to this model and had reservations. The Duke of Lavalier, with deep nasolabial folds, said, "Mr. Manager, who knows what the future holds? We might sell 120,000 today, but maybe only 1,200 tomorrow. I'm skeptical about the profitability. Your Grace, you underestimate women's obsession with beauty. They'd sooner starve than neglect their appearance. I can assure you, there's no off-season for Paris angels." "I'd like to sell other products in the store," Count Albrecht said. "That complicates things." While everyone haggled, a young man clenched his fists. His name was Baudouin, and he'd only taken over the family's textile business 3 years earlier. Last year, the French government and Britain signed a trade agreement, slashing tariffs on industrial products to almost zero. Cheap, high-quality British textiles flooded France, crippling his factory. In just over a year, he lost over half his family fortune. Finally, he sold the remaining factories, planning to retire as a wealthy man. He hadn't wanted to franchise a Paris Angel store, but a friend convinced him to take a look. Then, he recalled the franchise advertisement in the newspaper. Maybe pessimists are always right, but only optimists make money. He stood up, staring at Brent. "Mr. Manager, I've decided to franchise. As the first franchisee, and since I can have a discount of 150,000 yuan to open a store, I'll invest 300,000 livres to open 2 franchises." Chapter 42 Loan Crisis. You are listening at novelfull.audio. "You won't regret this decision," Manager Brent declared, tipping his hat with a flourish. "Viscount Baudouin, congratulations on joining the Paris Angels." Count Albrecht, surprised by the young Viscount's boldness, quickly followed suit. "I've also decided to invest in a franchise." "Excellent. Lord Earl, your investment sense is as sharp as ever." Everyone else was stunned. One minute they were haggling, the next, all 3 Paris stores were spoken for. As the saying goes, France is basically just Paris and the rest. Paris, being the political, economic, and cultural heart of France, boasts much higher spending power than anywhere else. Such significant investments were a clear sign of profitability. The hesitant onlookers now kicked themselves, regretting their lack of courage. "But you can't miss out twice." Duke Lavalier piped up, "I'll open a shop in Reims, my hometown." "Ahem, count me in. I own some property in Marseille, I'll take 2 stores there. I'll invest in 1 too." That night, Brent was home, kissing the 7 franchise contracts in his hand, celebrating like crazy. Joining the Paris Angel Company was the best decision of his life. This very afternoon, he'd achieved financial freedom. Joseph had promised him a commission of 3,000 livres for every franchise signed. In other words, he was now a rich man, worth over 20,000. He poured himself a glass of wine, toasted the contracts, and started planning. First, he'd buy a villa in the Louvre or Saint-Germain area. Then, he'd propose to Viscount Massiel's son. That old moneybags wouldn't be laughing at his family's finances anymore. Joseph signed the contracts Brent sent over without much surprise. The potential profits of Paris Angel were obvious to anyone. While the French government was struggling, the private sector was still wealthy, so there was no shortage of investors for such a promising venture. These 7 stores were just the beginning. He predicted that once these franchises opened, the results would attract at least twice as many new franchisees. After Brent left, Joseph, a top official in French finance, headed to the finance minister's office. As he entered, officials swarmed around him, offering warm greetings and congratulations. "Your Highness, congratulations. Your Highness saved the Dutch. The Prussians retreated in disgrace." The savior of France, Finance Minister Brian stepped forward. "Your Highness, I've heard about what happened in the Netherlands. Your diplomatic skills are truly remarkable." Joseph smiled. It was a victory for France. I just gave it a little nudge. Another round of applause erupted before the crowd gradually dispersed. Brian lowered his voice. Your Highness, I understand the High Court's review will be completed soon. They'll likely still reject the registration. Joseph wasn't surprised. The bill had been designed to be rejected, he said calmly. Archbishop Brian, don't worry. This is just the beginning. I haven't played my ace yet. Brian, recalling the Crown Prince's skillful handling of the Netherlands situation, felt reassured. He nodded encouragingly, then casually remarked, by the way, I saw yesterday's financial report. It seems your loan hasn't been finalized yet. No, thank you for the reminder. I'll take care of it as soon as possible. Back in his office, Joseph reviewed recent important matters and asked his assistant, tomorrow's loan negotiation with Louvel Bank has been postponed again. The assistant said helplessly, Your Highness, they claim they're busy with audits and don't have the capacity for other matters right now. Joseph frowned. What's the status with Louvel Bank? No response yet, but I heard they've invested heavily in the British automatic loom industry and may not be able to provide a multi-million loan anytime soon. Huh. Joseph narrowed his eyes. Traditionally, the French government worked with two banks for short-term loans for over a decade. In the past, the finance minister's assistant didn't even need to intervene, the banks would draft the agreement 2 months in advance, but now, with only half a month until the national debt matured, both banks were stalling. Something was clearly wrong. The banking system in this era was slow. For a large sum of over 6 million, it took days to transfer funds after the agreement was signed. Delaying it by another 8 or 9 days would mean a potential debt default for France. They needed another plan. Joseph signaled Iman at the door. Please have the carriage ready. I'm going to the Paris Discount Bank. Yes, Your Highness. At noon, Joseph arrived at the Paris Discount Bank headquarters, the largest bank in France. The bank manager and a group of executives greeted the Crown Prince with great fanfare, even hosting a lunch for him. However, when Joseph brought up the loan, he was politely turned down. Your Highness, we have an agreement with Louvel and other banks. They handle the government's large short-term loans. It wouldn't be appropriate for us to interfere in that business. Despite Joseph's best efforts, the discount bank only offered medium and long-term loans with collateral, which would take too long to arrange. Joseph had no choice but to leave and try the Bank of Paris, but got the same answer. His last hope was the Royal Bank, but they were broke. Although large, the Royal Bank had been ruined by John Law's hyperinflation and the Mississippi Company Ponzi scheme, and was now as poor as the French government. In the end, only 2 medium-sized banks agreed to lend 600,000 livres to the French government, at a steep 25% interest. Other small banks had too little equity to provide significant loans. Back in the carriage, Joseph's face was grim. These banks were clearly acting in concert, and it wasn't just about raising interest rates. He looked at his financial assistant. Can we use administrative measures to pressure those banks? The assistant winced. Your Highness, given the government's current financial state, it wouldn't be wise to antagonize the banking industry too much. Joseph took a deep breath, glanced at the Kano Bank outside the window, and said in a low voice, They think they can manipulate national finance just because they control the money? Fine. I'll open my own bank. Chapter 43 Money Ability. Kneel down and beg for monthly votes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Joseph was already planning to launch his own bank, to fix a country's finances, especially after the Royal Bank's collapse. Banks are essential. France didn't even have a symbolic central bank, leaving the government with almost no financial control. Plus, the Industrial Revolution was about to explode, demanding massive financial backing to keep development on track. So, a bank was a must for Joseph, but he didn't think now was the ideal time. Banks depend on the size of their capital. A bank with $1 million in capital can't easily beat a competitor with 10 million, no matter how well it's run. Joseph had intended to build up more resources before diving headfirst into banking. However, financial power plays by existing banks, coupled with the risk of the government defaulting on its debt, forced him to move faster. Fortunately, Paris Angel Company's profits were great, even exceeding his expectations, giving him a lot of financial confidence. Now he just needed a plan. As the carriage rolled along, Joseph gazed out the window, watching the trees and pedestrians go by while mapping out his banking strategy. The 18th century banking scene was booming, but from a financial history perspective, it was just getting started. The shady tactics later invented by financial giants hadn't even been thought of yet. For Joseph, France's financial sector was like Columbus seeing America, a new world full of opportunities. Over an hour later, the entire plan clicked into place. After double-checking its completeness and practicality, he finally looked relaxed and told Iman. "Get word to Mr. Brent. Tell him to come see me ASAP." "Yes, Your Highness." 3 hours later, Joseph returned to Versailles to find Brent already waiting. The guy was so dedicated, he'd skipped the carriage and ridden here himself to save time. Joseph praised his efficiency, then gathered his architects, painters, carpenters, accountants, and others in his study and started handing out assignments. "From now on, you have one job: open as many Paris Angel franchise stores as humanly possible, as fast as you can." He looked at Brent. "You're in charge. Use whatever resources I have to open at least 3 stores in Paris within a week. Plus, we'll open another company-owned store in Reims." Brent looked serious. Even though the glass walls, booths, lights, and even store uniforms for the new franchises were already prepared per the prince's previous instructions, decorating the walls and floors would be incredibly time-consuming, especially with multiple stores going up at once. 1 week seemed impossible. Joseph saw his expression, smiled slightly, and said, "You'll get a bonus of 1,000 livres for opening the first franchise. 1,500 livres for the second. And it'll keep going up by 500 livres for each additional store." He turned to the architect and others. "Everyone gets a 500 livre bonus for the first store, increasing by 200 livres for each one after that." Motivation activated. Brent's heart raced as he did the math. If he could get those 3 Paris stores done, he'd pocket 4,500 livres that week. 7,000 for 4 stores, 10,000 for 5, if they managed all 7 franchises and the company store, his bonus would be a whopping 22,000 livres. Time to buy that second villa. Almost shouting, with a crazed look in his eyes, he blurted out. "Don't worry, Your Highness. I swear, I won't let you down." He waved frantically at the architects, painters, and others. "Quit standing around. Let's go." The group bowed quickly to Joseph, said their goodbyes, and sprinted out of the palace like they were running the 100-meter dash. Outside Versailles, Brent shoved 10 livres into the coachman's hand and yelled, "Hurry! Back to Paris! Step on it!" The painter was still figuring out the bonus. 3 stores is 2,100 livres. Finish everything, and it's 9,600 livres. Oh, God! 9,600 livres. His heart skipped a beat, and he gasped. Turning to the coachman, he yelled, "Mr. Brembo, show us what you've got. Faster!" After everyone left, Joseph quickly jotted down a few lines, handed them to Imang, and ordered, "Spread this message through every newspaper, salon, dance, whatever it takes. Here's 15,000 livres, spend every last bit of it within a week." Imang looked puzzled. He glanced at the note in his hand and saw, "On the 30th of Frost Moon, shares of Paris Angel Company will officially be offered for sale in France. Subscriptions are welcome." Slogan, "Catch the right wind, and even a pig can fly. Paris Angel Company is the next big thing." Chapter 44: A Powerful Shareholder Group. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Seeing he had everyone's attention, Joseph continued, "The bank's total share capital is 10 million shares, priced at 1 livre each. We won't be offering them to the public just yet." Mono smiled and nodded. Since your highness has invited us, we should definitely buy in. But what's the total investment you're looking for? About 10 million livres. The three men perked up, suddenly very interested. They'd figured it'd be a profitable venture, but were they actually being hit up to invest? If it was a half-baked bank, and he was saying he wanted to invest 10 million, who knew how much he could actually pull together? If they had that kind of money, wouldn't they be better off putting it into an established discount bank? Robert, who was the least close to Joseph and the poorest of the three, immediately said with a strained smile, "Your Highness, you know my situation. I'm afraid I can't afford to invest a lot." Joseph smiled faintly. "Just hear me out. In a week, Paris Angel Company will launch its IPO, offering shares to the public. The total share capital is also 10 million shares, and they'll be selling 2 million shares at 2 livres apiece. If you invest in my bank, you'll get the chance to buy the same number of Paris Angel shares at 1 livre each before the public offering." The three men's eyes lit up. Brian, ever the finance guy, hesitated. "Your Highness, even though Paris Angel is doing well, are they really worth 2 livres a share? 0.2 livres a share, with 10 million shares total, meant Paris Angel's market value was a staggering 20 million livres. Joseph signaled to the lawyer by the door to bring over the franchise agreements and said with a smile, "Paris Angel already has 7 franchises up and running. Here's the contract, and more investors are ready to sign up. I'll also be opening several new company-owned stores in various locations. I'm confident that before long, you'll see Paris Angel stores in every major city in France. Within 6 months, they'll be all over Europe. Frankly, 2 livres a share is a steal," that he went on to explain the concept of franchising, and now the three men couldn't hide their excitement. "What's the hottest company in Paris right now?" "Without a doubt, it's Paris Angel. Every woman in Paris knows about Angel Water. Even grandmothers and young girls are dropping serious cash on these cosmetics, and Angel Water's influence is spreading across France. Just a few days ago, a group of ladies from Marseille came to Paris just to buy it. If it was just one store, the company wouldn't be worth 20 million, but with 9 stores, the valuation started to make sense, and this franchise model was a game changer." To be honest, after hearing about it, the three were even thinking about opening their own franchise. How did the Crown Prince come up with such a brilliant business model? No wonder everyone says he's touched by God. It was clear that soon, France would be saturated with Paris Angel franchises, and when that happened, the company's market value would explode like the Seine River during a flash flood. Brian narrowed his eyes. Buying it for 1 livre and selling it later meant an easy 1 livre profit per share. It was practically free money being handed out with the bank shares, plus, he figured Paris Angel's share price wouldn't stay at 2 livres forever and was destined to climb. He didn't hesitate any longer. He looked at Joseph and said, "Your Highness, in that case, I'll invest 250,000 livres." Seeing that the Archbishop was in, Mono jumped in. "Your Highness, I'll put in 500,000 livres." Joseph looked a little taken aback. "Count Mono, because the shares are limited, I can only give you a maximum of 3%. Please understand, after all, there's the King and Queen, Prince Condé, Count Artois, and others." Hearing those names, Mono immediately smiled and waved his hand. Okay, 300,000 it is then." Robert gritted his teeth and scraped together 200,000 livres. Finally, Joseph clarified that these shares would only have dividend rights, not operational control. The three men were in it for the money, so they had no objections. The dinner was a lively affair, filled with laughter as everyone raised their glasses and clinked them together. The next day, Joseph had lunch with Louis XVI and Queen Mary and used the opportunity to sell them each 5% of the bank's shares. He didn't need the Paris Angel shares as bait for his parents. Joseph directly asked for an investment of 500,000, simply saying thank you to express his gratitude. The only problem was, Louis XVI had spent 600,000 livres supporting his son's strategy last time. Although it had turned out to be a shrewd move that yielded a significant political win, it hadn't resulted in much cash. At the moment, he only had about 100,000 livres to spare, so he invested it all in his son's venture, promising to provide the rest as a blank check. Queen Mary, famously nicknamed Mrs. Deficit, was accustomed to spending money. She only had 220,000 on hand and promised to make up the remaining 280,000 later. However, Joseph wasn't really doing it for their money. He mainly wanted to get two powerful figures to invest so he could wave their names around to get what he wanted. In the afternoon, Joseph rushed to Paris and met with the Prince of Condé, who held considerable influence in the military, and the staunch royalist Duke of Artois, Louis XVI's brother. Hearing that they could buy Paris Angel shares at a discount, neither hesitated to take the free money. Each subscribed for 400,000 livres worth of bank shares, grateful for the Crown Prince's favor. That day at noon, all of France was buzzing about the Paris Angel Company's stock offering. Every newspaper was talking about Paris Angel, and every salon conversation somehow revolved around it. Of course, insider information was circulating in the Palace of Versailles, claiming that Paris Angel was selling 120,000 units a day, had already opened 8 or 9 branches, and had plans to open stores in the UK, Spain, the Netherlands, and elsewhere. The company's scale was truly remarkable. Everyone was itching to get in on the action and started scrambling to raise funds, preparing to snap up Paris Angel's pre-IPO shares. Meanwhile, in the office of the general manager of Mtlnovel in Paris, General Manager Etienne frowned and asked his assistant, "Has anyone from the finance minister's office contacted us?" The assistant nodded. "Yes, a low-level official came asking about the loan over 10 days ago, but we haven't heard anything since." Etienne puzzled to himself, "That's strange. The national debt is almost due, and the Crown Prince isn't worried." The assistant suggested, "Did they get a loan from another bank?" Etienne shook his head. "The Duke of Orleans already contacted other banks. No one's going to lend to him." He thought to himself, even if the Crown Prince has no experience, other financial officials should remind him about the national debt. Why is he so relaxed? Chapter 45, Controlling the Paris Police. Please follow up. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Etienne considered his options at length and decided to head to Versailles the next day to check things out personally. After all, this loan was a significant deal for Louvel Bank. He'd promised the Duke of Orleans he'd wait until the last minute before lending any money, but that didn't mean he wasn't interested in closing the deal. The next day, inside Joseph's study, Besançon and Friant sat stiffly on the sofa draped with Persian blankets. Joseph gestured for them to have some tea, a smile playing on his lips. "Sounds like things are moving along nicely on your end." Besançon, now officially the Paris police chief, retrieved a document and handed it to Joseph with deference. "Your Highness, the evaluation, reorganization, and training of police officers in Paris's various districts are complete. The new force took over security duties a few days ago. This document contains recommendations for key police department positions following the reorganization. Your final approval is needed." Joseph opened the document and scanned the list of police station positions. Each position had at least 2 candidates listed, along with detailed information on each person. He saw that it amounted to a major overhaul of the entire Paris police system. Because the St. Anthony district was the first to undergo police reform, its department accounted for nearly 40% of the official selections. Arden and Magoni were both nominated as police commissioners. In addition, business-savvy, honest, and reputable officers from the previous police force were selected and promoted to various levels within the department. However, in line with Joseph's instructions, only people from minor noble families or commoners were considered. There were also a few individuals handpicked by Besançon himself. Joseph nodded, recognizing Besançon's dedication to police reform and his capable leadership. With these new officials in place, the Paris police system would be firmly under their control. He approved Arden and a few others he recognized, leaving the remaining decisions to Besançon. He believed in trusting his subordinates and giving them the authority to do their jobs effectively. Besançon continued, "Your Highness, regarding the former police officers, my staff took the liberty of creating a daily affairs team responsible for tasks like river patrol and sanitation. They've all been reassigned to this team. Joseph knew he was referring to those who had essentially bought their way into the police force. Because of their contracts with City Hall, they couldn't be fired outright. Putting them in charge of city sanitation was a good solution. Good, that's a smart move. Besançon concluded cautiously, Your Highness, the new uniforms have been made and the equipment has been upgraded. However, funding is. Joseph smiled and waved his hand dismissively. Just write up a report with the amount you need, and it's done. Yes, Your Highness. Thank you. Joseph now had the franchise fees from Paris Angel, plus the King's Bank stock investments for cabinet officials, and the operating income from the Paris Angel Company, adding up to over 3.1 million livres. The cost of the Paris Police Department was the least of his worries. Friant waited for Besançon to finish his report, then immediately spoke up. Your Highness, the first class of trainees at the Paris Police Academy has been recruited, totaling 201 people. I'm planning to officially open the academy in a week. Would you be available to preside over the opening ceremony? Already? I definitely want to go. Joseph was surprised. The police academy was just an idea a little over 2 weeks ago, and now it was opening next week? Friant said, Your Highness, as you instructed, I purchased a 5-acre plot of land in the St. Anthony district. There are several buildings on the property. They're a bit run down, but with a little renovation, they can serve as school buildings. Also, the citizens of St. Anthony district heard about your opening the police academy and volunteered to help. Projects like leveling the playground were completed in just 1 week. Besançon added, Your Highness, since last week, I've been rotating 100 police officers to the academy each day for training. While the academy is still somewhat basic, it's sufficient for general training. Joseph thought to himself, this Friant is a real go-getter. His efficiency is unbelievable, especially for someone from the 18th century, he needs to be rewarded handsomely, Chapter 46 The Inspector General of Police and the Dean of Academic Affairs, please add to the book. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Great job. Joseph told Friant approvingly. Keep recruiting students. Select the best, those with drive and qualifications, and create an elite squad for focus training. Also, the police academy construction needs to step up. Don't skimp, but don't get bogged down either. I want a new school building ASAP, along with all the training equipment you need. Aim for Paris Military Academy standards, and exceed them, not fall short. Here's 250,000 livres to start. Friant's heart skipped a beat. That kind of money wasn't for some glorified cop school. That was enough to build a real military academy. Joseph, seemingly testing his reaction, continued, that's just the initial build cost. I'm planning to invest over $1 million total. Once it's all done, we'll be enrolling over 3,000 students. Friant swallowed hard and replied quickly, yes. Of course, Your Highness. Joseph added casually, by the way, everyone's been putting in the hours setting up the academy. Take 5,000 livres from the funds as a bonus for the management team, including Chi himself. Yes. Thank you, Your Highness. The academy preparations went smoother than anticipated, so they deserve the reward. With only 20-odd instructors and staff at the newly opened academy, including construction personnel and managers, that's like half a year's salary for everyone. Besançon's eyes widened with envy. He'd figured Friant was just heading a police academy, but now he saw it was something else entirely. Friant's career might even outpace his own. He resolved to step up his game. He'd have to beat Friant within the police system. Meanwhile, Etienne, the general manager of Louvel Bank, arrived at Versailles Palace a little after 10 in the morning. He'd spent over a decade in the French financial system and knew it inside and out. It didn't take long to find a contact. Pulling him aside, Etienne asked in a low voice, Viscount Leon, the national debt is almost due. Why isn't anyone in finance sweating it? Viscount Leon glanced around and whispered, word is, French Reserve Bank has already loaned the Crown Prince the money. Laborde Bank, too. They don't need your loan, not anymore. Etienne frowned, racking his brain. He'd never heard of this Reserve Bank of France. Suspicious, he asked, you sure about that? You questioning me? Viscount Leon said, annoyed. The Reserve Bank of France's loan agreement is all drawn up. I saw it myself. What would I be wrong about? Etienne felt like he'd been hit by a truck. The short-term loan was for 6 million livres, split between Louvel and Laborde banks. It would generate over 300,000 in interest for Louvel annually, a key piece of business. If someone snatched that deal, he'd be in deep trouble. Sweating, he remembered the agreement with the Duke of Orleans. Louvel Bank would delay the loan until the last minute. When the Crown Prince was desperate, the Duke's people would step in, and the bank would get the deal. Why had things changed? Damn it, that Reserve Bank of France. Etienne's blood was boiling. It had to be some fly-by-night operation that didn't know the ropes. Once this was over, he'd make them pay. First, he had to win back that loan. Thanking Viscount Lyon and promising favors, Etienne rushed to the finance minister's office. He had a plan: offer a lower interest rate of 17%. That should impress the Crown Prince. If that didn't work, he'd drop it to 16%. Besançon and Friant finished their police system briefing. As they stood to take their leave, Joseph's financial assistant approached and saluted. Your Highness, Etienne, the general manager of Louvel Bank, has requested an audience. He says he wants to discuss the loan. Joseph's face darkened at the mention of Louvel Bank. There's nothing to discuss. Tell him to go home. The assistant hesitated. Your Highness, Mr. Etienne said he's willing to lower the interest rate to 17% to show his sincerity. Joseph smiled. Sincerity? He must have heard about the Reserve Bank of France. Getting nervous now. Too late. The Reserve Bank of France was the bank he was setting up. While it wasn't officially launched, he'd already drafted an agreement with the French government. He told his assistant, tell him, and Laborde Bank, too, that their loan services are no longer required. And while you're at it, see if there's any other business the government does with those two banks. Develop a plan to transfer all their loans to other banks. We'll call it the Financial Risk Reduction Plan. Surprise flickered in the assistant's eyes. He bowed quickly. Yes, Your Highness. Besançon was listening intently. Seeing the Crown Prince's clear displeasure when Louvel Bank was mentioned, he filed it away. Leaving the Crown Prince's chambers, he caught up with the assistant and asked what was going on. While it touched on financial secrets, the assistant turned polite when he learned Besançon was the new Paris police chief, and explained the situation. Besançon's eyes narrowed. Two banks had tried to screw the Crown Prince, almost causing him to default. The Crown Prince had personally promoted him to police chief, entrusting him with the police reform. He knew where his loyalties lay and was devoted to the Crown Prince. People were trying to make trouble for the Crown Prince. His Highness might be generous enough to ignore it, but as a direct subordinate, he wouldn't let it slide. Banco Louvel and Banco Laborde. They would pay for this. Across the palace, Etienne was walking out in despair. He'd just been informed that Louvel Bank wouldn't just be missing out on the 6 million livre loan, but the government would likely terminate all future business with them. Louvel Bank's core business was providing the government with short-term, high-interest loans with almost no risk. In the past, the French government was always broke and begging for bank loans. Suddenly, they were playing hardball. Etienne was ashen. If this went through, he wouldn't just lose his job. Louvel Bank's furious shareholders would probably sell him into slavery in Haiti. He shuddered, but the situation was beyond his control. Gritting his teeth, he rushed back to Paris to report to the bank's board. Thank you for your support, which has allowed the author to enter the third round of recommendations for the new book. I would appreciate monthly votes, recommendations, and follow-up reads. Thank you again. Chapter 47 Award Ceremony. Please vote for me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Draud Laborde was more rattled than he'd been since taking over the family business. The manager of Laborde Bank had just delivered some awful news. The French government, specifically the Dauphin in charge of financial loans, was planning to cut ties. With the French economy in a slump, these large government loans were the lifeblood of Laborde Bank. Losing that business could mean the bank's demise. Soon after, Goldman, the major shareholder of Mtlnovel Bank, confirmed the government's intentions. Both banks were in the same boat, needing to cooperate fully to survive. After lengthy discussions involving shareholders from both banks, they pinpointed the root of the problem: the French Reserve Bank. This new bank wasn't playing by the established rules of the banking industry. Without it, the French government would be forced to come crawling to Mtlnovel and Laborde for loans. Someone soon suggested, maybe we can cut a deal with this French Reserve Bank. So, Count Laborde said, looking around the room, who has intel on this bank? Silence. Finally, Goldman frowned and said, rumor has it, it's a foreign bank that just set up shop in Paris. Laborde nodded. Looks like we need to get Mr. Necker involved. At the villa of Necker, a highly respected advisor to the French Banking Association and a renowned banker, Laborde and Goldman recounted the situation, referring to the French government discreetly as a major client and the national debt as the client's private debt, then looked at Necker expectantly. If anyone in Paris knew anything about the Reserve Bank of France, it was Necker, the most connected guru in French banking. But Necker simply smiled and shook his head. Never heard of them. He bent down to prune the fragrant jasmine, adding, however, I believe you too are falling for your client's trick. A trick? He's a very calculating gentleman, Necker said, gathering the fallen flower branches and wiping his brow. It's precisely during times like these that he wants you to think he wouldn't risk bluffing. But I'm willing to bet this French Reserve Bank is just a scare tactic. He figures that if you come running, worried about losing the business, he can strong-arm you into lowering the interest rate. Then, he'll drop the charade with the fictitious bank and pressure you to loan the money ASAP. Laborde and Goldman exchanged glances, realization dawning on their faces. Necker, looking like a hunter who had spotted his prey, added, my guess is, if you hold your ground, he'll cave in the last day or two before the debt is due. He'll get that loan from you, no matter the cost. Laborde nodded emphatically. Mr. Necker, you're truly the best banker in France. We would have been duped without you. We'll follow your advice and wait until the last minute. In the Apollo Hall of the Palace of Versailles, a lavish commendation ceremony was in full swing. A burst of military drums and trumpets fell silent. The Minister of War, the Marquis Saint-Priest, barked, attention. To the soldiers standing before him, his deputy slammed his cane against the floor with a sharp crack. The soldiers stood ramrod straight, heads held high. Saint-Priest turned and saluted Louis XVI. Your Majesty the Queen, Your Royal Highness the Dauphin, allow me to present the heroes of the Battle of Mtlnovel. Captain Marie-François de Dubois. Lieutenant Therese Prévert de Foucault. Second Lieutenant Louis-André de Davout. After the introductions, Louis XVI approached Dubois, praising him, then presented him with brass cufflinks, saying solemnly, you are officially promoted to the rank of Major. He then proceeded to Foucault, while Queen Mary took a wreath from a maid and placed it on Dubois' head, smiling. You are a hero of France. As she moved to the next recipient, Joseph approached Dubois and offered prepared congratulations. Your tactics were brilliant. Without your leadership, the Dutch army would have probably fallen within the first 2 days. He hadn't planned on attending such a formal ceremony, but as the architect of the Dutch victory over Prussia, the Queen and the military had strongly urged him to be there. Dubois raised his hat in response. Your Highness, the credit is not mine. You designed the overall strategy that forced the Prussians to retreat. As for the tactics in Mtlnovel, that was the work of a good friend, Captain Berthier. I just followed his plan. Joseph recognized the name. Berthier. Which Berthier are you talking about? Your Highness, Major Louis Alexander Berthier, under General Custinat. Note 1, Davout's surname should be Diavoux, which is close to de Davout. According to translation habits, it is still written as Davout, and the word symbolizing the nobility is added in front. I have finished a novel, lady, please stop, a fantasy novel about sexual transformation, and it has an audio version. You are welcome to read it. Lady, please stop. Synopsis. Once the surgeon traveled through time, he came to a different world where women were strong and men were weak, and there were more women than men. He became Su Yang, the young master of the Su family. Women with strong spiritual powers can move mountains and reclaim seas, reach for stars and block out the sun, and conquer the world with their strength. Su Yang, rely on soft power to conquer the world. Ahem, rely on soft power. Chapter 48. Today is a good day. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Joseph's eyes lit up, but he played it cool, asking, "So, what else do you know about him?" Du Bois seemed a little bummed. "I'm the one getting the award today. Why does His Highness keep bringing up Alexander?" "Still," he answered patiently, "Your Highness, he's from a military family. He's a good artist, quick-witted, and tough as nails. He even fought in the American Revolution with Count Rochambeau, and he came up with the battle plan for Yorktown." Hearing about the drawing and the American Revolutionary War, Joseph was sure, this was Napoleon's famous personal nanny, the chief of staff who followed the emperor from Italy to Russia, racking up victories left and right. Marshal Berthier, of course, the future marshal, was just a regular major, working under some no-name noble. Joseph knew that to get France back on track, he needed control of the army. But the bigwigs were calling the shots in the French military. France was still stuck between the old feudal system and a modern army. The troops were like private armies from the late Ming dynasty. Each province's garrison was funded by local money, and nobles, equipment and combat readiness depended entirely on local investment. Naturally, the people footing the bill got to command. You could see it in the names: Flanders Brigade, Soissons Infantry Regiment, Bordeaux Brigade, named after the Lord's old stomping grounds. So, if the king wanted to move troops, he had to get the nobles' okay. In good times, they played along, but if things got rocky, that changed. Right now, the French aristocracy and the king weren't exactly best buddies. During the French Revolution, Louis XVI claimed he'd called up 20 regiments to back him, but by the time he was done, not a single soldier had set foot in Paris. Only the 16 Swiss mercenary regiments, paid for privately, and a few personal guards were truly loyal. He couldn't even boss around the French guards stationed right under his nose. Those Parisian citizens attacking the Bastille had guns, sure, but they were staring up at a 10-meter-high fortress. It took the French guards dragging in cannons to finally make the warden surrender. The royal family seemed powerful, bathed in glory. But the nobles and rising capitalists were already quietly grabbing power in the military, courts, economy, public opinion. Everywhere, the king was weakest in the military and economy. For now, those nobles and capitalists hadn't quite figured out how to split the pie, so the king kept up appearances. But when the Estates General met, all hell would break loose. That's why controlling the military was always Joseph's top priority, but his political base was too weak to muscle in on the military aristocracy. Taking power would be a long, uphill battle. Joseph had a plan. The Paris Police Academy was his first foothold. Back then, people saw the police as glorified thugs, no big deal. Which gave Joseph room to get involved in the force. The police academy was a start. He could build a loyal force from the ground up. Easier said than done. First, he needed cash. Armies were expensive. Luckily, he had Paris Angel Company. Not enough to feed the beast, but enough for seed money. Second, gear. He needed weapons that would blow everyone else out of the water. Joseph was confident. The tech he knew could crush this era. He just had to figure out how to build it. Finally, and most important, people. Talented soldiers and, especially, great leaders. A good general could win a battle. And Berthier was just such an officer. Without him, Napoleon might have been a nobody. Now was the time to connect with Berthier, and Joseph couldn't miss it. He was about to pump Du Bois for more info when someone coughed. Iman was winking. The award ceremony. He went over to Lieutenant Foucault, gave the artillery company commander some encouragement, and moved on. The young cavalry captain stood up straighter. Ever since he'd gotten wind of the situation in the Netherlands, he'd been a big fan of the young prince. Joseph smiled. He'd been hoping to hear the name Davout. He praised Davout for his cavalry's bravery, then jumped right in. Lieutenant Davout, did anyone in your family serve in the Royal Guard? Davout looked surprised. Yes, Your Highness. My father was a company commander in the Royal Cavalry. Joseph's eyes lit up. Any relatives named Nicolas? Davout was even more surprised. Your Highness, you know my brother. Nicolas is your brother? Yes, Your Highness. Louis Nicolas de Davout is my brother. Joseph was thrilled. What a lucky day. 2 jackpots in a row. Nicolas Davout. The Iron Marshal. One of Napoleon's top 3 generals, a military genius, known for winning with less, for turning the tide of battle single-handedly, the man Napoleon called the purest glory of France. If I miss this, I'll never forgive myself. Joseph stepped closer. Where is your brother serving now? Your Highness, Nicolas is still at military school. He graduates next year. Not yet. Joseph was a little bummed, but then he reconsidered. Better to grab him now. When he graduates, it'll be easy to bring him over and build trust. After the awards, the officers said goodbye to the king and queen. When they got to Joseph, he grabbed Dubois and André Davout, saying he wanted to hear about the fighting in the Netherlands, and dragged them out to the square outside Versailles. Since this book is being recommended, I urge readers to save it, recommend it, vote for it, and leave comments. The young author is grateful. Your support motivates me to write. Reader Group 103-621-7580, everyone is welcome to join. Chapter 49 The Crown Prince's Strategic Vision. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The huge fountain shimmered in the sunlight. Before Joseph could even open his mouth, André blurted out, Your Highness, I've got to know, how did you get the Prussians to back down? The image of the Prussian army's sudden retreat on that desperate day had been replaying in his mind ever since. Dubois, about to reprimand André for his lack of etiquette, was instead taken aback by the words order the Prussians to retreat. He exclaimed, so it really was His Highness's plan in the Netherlands, that he had no connection to the Textual family. He'd heard rumors linking the Crown Prince to the events in Holland, but this was the first confirmation he'd received. André nodded, looking at Joseph expectantly. Joseph smiled. Going into detail would take too long. Basically, Wilhelmina was turned over to the police in the southern Netherlands with instructions to send her back to Prussia. Then, the Patriot Party managed to get the Prince of Orange back to Amsterdam. That left William II with no excuse to continue meddling in the Netherlands. His simple explanation hinted at a complex operation, locating Wilhelmina, getting her into the southern Netherlands, and ultimately ensuring her safe return to Prussia. It had all happened at just the right moment, before William II was ready to let her go, leading him to suspect France. André and Dubois exchanged glances, their eyes reflecting surprise and admiration. The Crown Prince's strategy was brilliant. They were dying to know more, but they couldn't press him. The conversation then shifted to the intense fighting in the Netherlands, particularly the final day, when the Prussian army had launched an extremely fierce attack, resulting in casualties for over 40 of the 300 French volunteers. André sighed, adding gravely, the Prussian army has strict discipline and superior training. If they had continued their assault, I doubt the Dutch could have held out until nightfall. Dubois agreed. Alexander is currently studying the Prussian military system, their training methods, everything. According to him. He glanced cautiously at Joseph before continuing, the Prussian army's fighting ability is at least a third greater than our own. Joseph knew Dubois wasn't exaggerating. Prussia was once considered to have the finest army in Europe. The Junker aristocracy's military training system was comprehensive and incredibly strict. Coupled with German perseverance and discipline, even though their power had waned, their combat effectiveness was still significant. He stated solemnly, France's military system is outdated and should have been thoroughly reformed long ago. Historically, the French army had suffered a string of defeats. It wasn't until the rise of the emperor that the situation stabilized. Under his leadership, the army underwent significant reforms, transforming it into a formidable force. Du Bois immediately concurred. That's right. Alexander and I have discussed this extensively. We should adopt Prussian strategies across the board to prepare for future challenges. Learn from Prussia. Joseph looked at him and shook his head slightly. We need to surpass the Prussian army, not blindly copy them. André and Du Bois exchanged another look. Then how does your highness think the army should be reformed? Joseph had clearly given this some thought. The biggest problem with the French army is its fragmentation. There's no unified command, no consistent training, and huge discrepancies in equipment and soldier quality. When facing a major battle, the assembled army may appear large, but in reality, the number of effective fighting units is quite small. Since they were discussing military reform, he continued, advocating for abolishing local legions, unified management of the national army, increasing the number and improving the training of non-commissioned officers, and developing new tactics. André and Du Bois listened with wide eyes. The Crown Prince was only 13 years old, yet his strategic insight was astonishing. They had spent years at military academy, simply regurgitating what they'd learned, as if lacking any original thought. Chapter 50. Come to my bowl. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Du Bois, being older, understood that a strong army hinged on its organization, management, training, and logistics. He furiously scribbled down the Crown Prince's proposed military reforms. Develop a national recruitment system, complete with regulations for recruitment and pensions. Establish a Ministry of Military Affairs, phase out local garrisons, and standardize selection, evaluation, and promotion within the army. Elevate the status of distinguished soldiers, making military honor the highest aspiration. Create a national ordnance production and equipment system, encouraging research into new weapons and their rapid deployment. Open a military hospital. The more he wrote, the more energized he became. If these reforms were enacted, France would have an unbeatable army, capable of crushing any foe. The humiliation of the Paris Peace Treaty would be erased, and everything lost would be regained. His father had died at Liegnitz during the 7 Years' War. When Du Bois was only 8, he remembered France's defeat and the national gloom that followed. His father's death hadn't brought honor. Instead, cruel people mocked the French army's failures in front of him. He, a mere major, knew he couldn't single-handedly reform the military, but he could pass these valuable ideas to experts like Berthier for further development. From the corner of his eye, Joseph noticed Du Bois' intense focus. He felt the moment was right and smiled like a fox in a henhouse. Major, you seem to agree with this military reform plan. Would you be interested in helping me implement it? I'm willing to serve your highness. Du Bois hesitated. But I'm not sure I'm qualified. I'm afraid I'd disappoint you. I'll find people who are qualified, like the chief of staff. Joseph thought, but he smiled and said, your practical experience is exactly what we need to refine the plan. I'm assembling a team to study military theory, and I'd like you to be part of it. Du Bois snapped to attention. It would be an honor to serve you. Pleased, Joseph turned to André with a friendly smile. Lieutenant, why didn't you follow in your father's footsteps and stay in the Royal Guard? Sadness flashed in André's eyes. Your Highness, I was driven by passion. But my pursuit of that passion ended up burning some bridges. It led me to the Soissons Cavalry Battalion. Joseph asked, would you be willing to serve here? Absolutely. André exclaimed, unable to hide his surprise and joy. The Davout family's title was granted by the late king. Loyalty to the royal family is our oath. I will be your highness's most loyal soldier. Joseph was thrilled. With these two on board, he'd soon have Berthier and Davout working for him. The talk of Paris these days centered on the new Paris Angel stores. It was hard to ignore. 3 stores were being built simultaneously, sucking in wood, glass, paint, and hardware from all over Paris. The best craftsmen in Paris were working on Paris Angel stores. Exhausted, yes, but also wildly excited. They were making more money in a week than they usually made in 3 months. Paris Angel's supervisors provided 4 meals a day, delivered on time, and attentively waited for the craftsmen to finish before politely asking them to resume their work. The meals consisted of fried meats, corn with butter, white bread, and hearty vegetable soup. The food was so delicious and plentiful that they could eat as much as they wanted. No one complained about being tired, and no one wanted a break. Anyone suggesting a rest would be cursed. 4 times the usual pay. Stopping even for a second was a crime against their wallets. At night, countless oil lamps lit the stores, turning night into day, as the next shift took over. Some healthy craftsmen even worked 3 days and 2 nights straight, earning a whopping 28 livres in overtime. Overtime pay. Unbelievable. Hearing that the Crown Prince himself had requested this, the craftsmen prayed for him daily. Some modern historians claim that Westerners value leisure over work and have always disliked overtime. But 18th century France was all about hard work. 14-hour days in factories were common. If the pay was right, people would happily work 20 hours a day. Joseph hadn't anticipated that rushing to open the franchise stores would bring an unexpected bonus. Parisians with nothing better to do began watching the construction as entertainment, sending Paris Angel's popularity soaring. If they had trending topics back then, Paris Angels would have dominated. Entertainment was scarce back then. A luxurious store being decorated around the clock was a rare spectacle. The young beggar boy who lived with his sister and 4 other homeless kids in the alley behind the Paris Angel store was thriving, renting out chairs to the crowds. He'd followed Joseph's advice and started a chair rental business. He had made a lot of silver coins and his team had expanded to 6 people. He now rented a house, and he and his sister no longer had to go hungry. He even planned to save some money and spend a few hours every day learning to read. Time flew. Brent, the general manager of Paris Angel Company, stood on the boulevard Saint-Denis, gazing at the luxurious new Paris Angel store with immense pride. 7 days. In just 7 days, the new store had been decorated. He had led the company's employees and countless craftsmen to create this miracle. Of course, the 20,000 livres renovation budget had helped. 2 more similar stores were being completed that day in the western and northern districts of Paris. In Reims, 30 miles away, another franchise store was also nearing completion, though a few unexpected setbacks meant it would take another 2 days to finish. Paris Angel currently had 5 stores open for business, including locations as far away as Marseille and Bordeaux. According to reports from his men yesterday, those renovations would be completed by the end of the month at the latest. Meanwhile, a massive crowd had gathered in front of Paris City Hall, 400 to 500 people craning their necks, anxiously awaiting the official launch of Paris Angel Company shares. Due to the Bubble Act, this was the temporary stock exchange Joseph had chosen.